Welcome to What Do Siblings Talk About?
I'm Jacob,
And I'm Veronica.
and we're siblings.
Yay.
Hello and welcome everyone to episode 2 of What Do Siblings Talk About? I am Jacob, and this is Veronica, and this is not going out on the day we're recording it, but this is a very special Christmas Eve episode. And today we're talking about a similar topic to last time. We're talking about a YouTube content creator. This time it's one of my choice. In other words, a content creator that I have enjoyed consuming in the past. In this case, it's a guy called the Critical Drinker. He's a Scottish YouTuber, and I would consider him, I wouldn't consider him. He's a full-time YouTuber. He has almost 2.2 million subscribers and routinely gets over 1 million views on videos and publishes, it looks like at this point, 1 to 2 times per week. So there's a quick little introduction. He's in the generation. Last time we talked about Daniel Boland, I think Will Jordan.
A little younger, yeah.
Will Jordan is the name of this chap, the Critical Drinker, and kind of similar age. And some of the things we'll talk about are whether he belongs in sort of the same group as Daniel Boland, or kind of what's the same, what's different, what's the audience here. So Veronica, since this guy is, I think, new to you,
Yes.
or if not, okay, maybe you can start with some sort of initial thoughts.
Yeah, so I had not heard of him at all before you brought him up to me. So this was entirely new. I don't. So he primarily seems to review movies, occasionally video games, which I think is sort of a genre thing that I don't usually watch. So that's probably why I've never heard of him before. But I don't know. Initial thoughts. He's very entertaining. I mean, he's Scottish, so right off the bat, it's just I find that an attractive accent to listen to. So he could be talking about a whole variety of things, and I could just listen to it in the background. I don't know if I really had any expectations going in, because like I said, it's not usually the type of thing I watch. But it was, I think, fascinating just to see him kind of break down movies. And he brought up, when I was watching different reviews, he brought up a lot of things that I agreed with, but had never necessarily thought about before. So he would be talking about a movie and bring up a point about, maybe how a plot point didn't work or didn't make sense for the character. And when he would bring it up, and you'd sort of internally go, "Oh yeah, that did bug me when I watched the movie," but I never stopped to really articulate what exactly was wrong with this plot, or what exactly was wrong with this character. And that's, I think, kind of what he's doing is he is articulating and bringing out some of those things for people to think about more critically. So I don't know. It was definitely interesting for me, and I watched a lot of things that, movies I've never seen and have no interest in seeing, but the reviews were still interesting because of the way he was going about the reviews.
Sure. Yeah. And so I think I first encountered him probably 3 or 4 years ago. And in sort of looking at his YouTube history, he kind of made it big around the time the third trilogy of Star Wars movies were coming out. So something I hadn't. So I guess first off, what appealed to me about his style, about his content, is that kind of some of the big cultural media storytelling points in American media, he has some of the same criticisms that I do, or maybe I saw what you saw a little bit, is something bothered me. and he's able to articulate sort of
Mm-hmm.
specifically, look, this is what isn't working. This is why there's a problem here. But in sort of reviewing things for this episode, I actually went back and I hadn't looked at sort of his history. Um, and in his earliest videos, I'm going to pull up one here. Um, his content style is actually pretty, I would say, straightforward. So this is going back 7 or 8 years ago, I think. And this is a video called "My Review of Sharp," which I guess is a TV show which ran from the mid 90s.
It is. It's decent.
Okay, so you're actually familiar with this.
Yes. So like swashbuckling, you know.
Yeah, so I just want to play sort of what he sounds like back in the early days here. So
It also features a lot of well-known British actors in early roles in their careers, like Daniel Craig, Liz Hurley, Paul Bettany, and Mark Strong. In short then, Sharp is pretty damn good fun. If you're interested in the time period, or if you like watching guys shooting at each other, guys fighting with swords, guys yelling at each other, or women who look good in corsets, then The Sharp is the show for you.
So a few of my thoughts from that are he's clearly reading from a pre-prepared script. I don't know if pre-prepared is redundant or not, but he's reading from a script. He's listening to some of his other early videos. He stumbles a little bit on a few words. He says things very deliberately, like there where he's reading off the list of famous actors who had their start in or early success in this show. But it's not what I would consider particularly compelling. Maybe if I'd heard about Sharp and I just kind of wanted a quick overview of, is this something that I would be interested or not, I might go to that. That's not the kind of thing that captures viral attention, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like when you go back to his earlier ones, he seemed to initially he was sort of doing everything. So like there's some novel reviews in there. There are a lot of, I think, more gaming reviews than he does now. And things like Sharp, which maybe is bigger in the UK, but definitely not in the US. And now I think he does really just more blockbusters of, he's reviewing Dune and I don't know, Hamilton, whatever. I don't know what the blockbusters are, but he's doing more of the big Hollywood things versus some of the smaller stuff that I think he was doing initially.
Right. And I wonder if some of that is a consequence of the fact that this is his where he makes his livelihood now, as opposed to just kind of a side thing he did for fun.
Yeah.
One thing I did notice about the early videos is that I think his first video he uploaded to YouTube is just a smash up of scenes from two different movies, The Dark Knight Rises, and I don't even know the other one. But he clearly did some early video editing, whereas some of his other early stuff is just kind of monologue-ish reviews. Like that one of Sharp.
Do you think that was a conscious decision to move into more popular things, or do you think it just sort of happened organically as he got bigger and bigger?
So his first big hit where he went viral was a review of The Last Jedi, which is episode 8 of the most recent Disney Star Wars trilogy, which among sort of traditional Star Wars fans episode 7 was not viewed super well, but episode 8 was kind of universally trashed among particularly male Star Wars fans who had been fans of the original and possibly the prequel series. So I suspect he didn't realize how much attention that video would get. And I think that might be where he got the idea. He also changed his YouTube name. It was something rather generic. And then right around that time, or right after then, he changed it to this The Critical Drinker name. So Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about how his style has evolved. So there was that early that early video he made prior to him being famous, and here's another example. This is only 6 months or a year later. Um, so I was so wrong about Captain Marvel. So here we have a pretty big movie. This is one of the Marvel blockbuster superhero films, and I'm just going to play it from the start.
So I was stirring my Jack Daniels into my cornflakes this morning when I had a bit of an epiphany. You see, I've been wrong about Captain Marvel this whole time. But drinker...
So right there, I was stirring my Jack Daniels into my cereal this morning. But he's clearly got a whole different style going here.
Yeah.
In terms of what he's doing. He's clearly being a bit sardonic, and he even has this sort of I would say he's leaning into this drinker persona.
Yeah.
Which I have some thoughts about, but do you have any initial reaction to the switch here?
No, I mean, I obviously much better, much more engaging. And contrasting that to the Sharp video from earlier, like you said, you're not going to watch the Sharp video unless you're really interested in Sharp. That Captain Marvel video, you just watch that even if you're never going to watch the movie, because it's entertaining in and of itself.
Yeah, that I think goes back to something we talked about last episode, which is that the biggest content creators, the biggest attention getters, they're people who have an appealing persona themselves. Maybe an appealing personality, but at least an appealing persona. And I do want to talk a little bit about the difference between that. So the critical drinker is obviously a persona. This style shift, I don't think he changed as a person, Will Jordan, significantly. I mean, people change, of course, all the time, but how would you characterize the sort of persona that's being presented there?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like he's amplified certain aspects of his personality. So I think he's playing up the Scottishness a little bit more, just both in terms of accent and in terms of how he's wording things. And I don't know. It's a little bit of it reminds me of like a showman personality, of sort of like, I don't know how many people go to circuses nowadays, but like the ringmaster at a circus, where it's like, the big guy who comes out front and is sort of playing to the crowd and announcing everything. It reminds me a little bit of that sort of big, I don't know, main character personality, if you want to call it that. But
I'll say parenthetically on that point, just to sidetrack things for a moment. Who's the guy who plays Wolverine? Hugh Jackman.
Yes.
He made a movie a few years back called The Greatest Showman, which I tried to go and see with one of our younger brothers. And after like 45 minutes, we both looked at each other and were like, yeah, it's not worth staying around and watching the rest of it. It was so unwatchable. Really? I don't know what the target audience was, but
I never saw that. I mean, I definitely saw ads for it, but it was the kind of thing where I wasn't interested enough in the storyline to bother watching.
Yeah, I guess for us the appeal was more Hugh Jackman than anything else. But one of the problems is that Hugh Jackman has been particularly popular for his Wolverine character, which is an obvious over-the-top persona compared to the way a normal person would behave. And actually, kind of similar to a lot of what the Critical Drinker reviews, these superhero videos, it's a superhero. The Greatest Showman, he's portraying, and I know actors like to move out of the niche that they get pushed into. He's portraying a very sort of candid, straightforward character without much nuance, who's just kind of, they are themselves all the time. And I don't know. I think it was supposed to be like family friendly and heartwarming, but it just.
So is the problem that you couldn't see Hugh Jackman doing it? Like it was too much of a character switch, or was he just not good enough of an actor to pull it off, or both?
I think it. So this is a topic I want to get into a little bit. Is the name the critical drinker, which you mentioned the Scottish thing, and I think that the drinker part actually is related to the Scottishness that he's playing up in his persona. But I wanted to talk about the critical part a little bit because this touches on a few things that I've encountered in the past. What do you think titling yourself the critical drinker is supposed to indicate?
I don't know.
The critical part.
Yeah, I guess immediately it has almost a negative connotation because critical is never good, and technically the word could mean good. Like you could critically look through something and come out with a positive result, but critical, in critics, people always think that's bad because you look at something very closely and then you come out with some sort of scathing review of it.
Right.
And I don't
Yeah.
know if he intended that or if he just meant critical in the sense of I'm going to examine these things, more closely than your average viewer.
Right. Yeah, I think I agree with my knee-jerk reaction to the word critical is to sort of associate it with criticism and
Mm-hmm.
think of that as a negative thing. And I wonder to some extent if this is a difference between American and British English, where I wonder if it might have a less negative connotation there, because I think in general, Americans have this reflexive attitude where we want to discourage criticism and encourage affirmation and so forth.
Yeah.
So anyway, one thing I'm really interested in is the roots of words. And I know some ancient Greek criticism, the word comes from krino, which means to separate or to judge. So that in itself is not necessarily a negative thing. It's just a statement about the ability to kind of see, to be able to make distinctions about a thing. So anyway, just throw that in there because I can't help myself.
Yeah.
But
No,
it
I
also
think
reminds.
that's yeah, I think that's good. It's yeah, maybe it does say something about Americans that like all of the words that we've taken from that, like critic, criticism, critique, critical, like they're all negative.
Yeah, although
We've
we
lost
still
that
do
sort of
use the word.
ambivalent.
Yeah, we still do. People still will refer to themselves as an art critic or a film critic, but
Sure.
even then, a lot of normal Americans would consider those terms a little bit highfalutin. Um, One thing that sort of brings, I want to bring a few topics together here that I've brought up. One is our father studied political philosophy under one of the students of German or Austrian, I think German,
Sounds
political
right. Yeah.
philosopher, very, very influential in conservative circles, especially, called Leo Strauss, who then came to the US, taught at the University of Chicago for a while, and then got very connected with St. John's University in Annapolis, which kind
Mm-hmm.
of brings both sides, both our mother and our father's sides of the family together, because our mother then attended Thomas Aquinas College, which in some ways was a derivation from St. John's in Annapolis. So we sort of have Straussianism on both sides of the family. Um, and one of Leo Strauss's big topics, he wrote a book called Persecution and the Art of Writing. And one of his big topics there is esotericism. So the idea that for most art, there is a sort of public or obvious or external meaning, and then an esoteric or secret teaching. And this isn't
Mm-hmm.
like some big, um, this isn't some big, I don't know, conspiracy theory about, unreliable narrators like in Don Quixote or something, but more the idea that there are multiple levels of criticism that art will see and multiple levels of understanding. And it's not saying that smart people will be able to understand the hidden meaning and stupid people
Yeah.
won't. It's that there are layers to a work of art, and there's a degree to which the most important layer, or maybe the layer under which great artists realize they have to operate, is the esoteric layer. I'm sorry, this is getting kind of high level, but it one of the things that I think we see the critical drinker start to do once he gets popular is um, heavily laden irony.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to his Captain Marvel review, let me pull that back up because there's a bit of a funny excerpt near the end.
Drinker, you charismatic, I'll be there on opening night to bask in all of its glory. Now, if you can't appreciate the sarcasm in this video, then you almost certainly should go and see this movie, because I suspect you're the target audience. Now, I'm not advocating for a
I'm sorry, I just enjoyed that. But there's an example of his what I think is sort of this recognition that there's sort of the external meaning, but then there's the internal meaning. Like anyone listening to that review knows that the critical drinker doesn't like Captain Marvel, or at least doesn't like what he's seen of it so far. So had to throw that in there, which also brought to mind the fact that both under sort of previous generations of political repression, if you will, there would be speech codes where like you can say this word this many times, or you can't say this word. Mm-hmm. This is also true today when it comes to like language about particular groups of people. Oh, if your skin is this color, you cannot say this word. Yeah. Where it's very much about policing the very surface level, but actual policing of, or you can't say the coronavirus came from a lab in China, but like serious policing of actual real meaning on a deeper level. That's just not being addressed. So the esoteric kind of gets to go and do whatever it wants.
Whatever. Yeah, as long as your literal words are past the police test. Yeah, you can get the whatever esoteric, allegorical, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, you can kind of get away with saying whatever you want.
Yeah. Did you have any other topics you wanted to cover on
the critical drinker, or just on art analysis? Yeah, I don't know. I think, well, like I was saying earlier, like I find his analysis fascinating. Just the way he looks at sort of character development and story development. And I mean, clearly he's very good at what he does. Like he is able to watch a movie and really pinpoint, like, this is where the plot breaks down. This is where the story went wrong. And he has a couple of, he does some reviews where he'll go back and like fix a story, where he'll go, okay, this is, here's the plot of, maybe, I don't know if he did one for Captain America, but he's done certainly some of the Marvel movies where he goes, okay, this is where the story really went off the rails. So we're going to go back to that point and then sort of reimagine it. And here's what I would do to fix a story if I were a screenwriter. And some of that is really fascinating, just to see both his capability to be able to analyze exactly what went wrong. But then also, there's a certain amount of inventiveness in coming up with, how do you fix this character or this broken storyline?
Yeah. You had a couple of movie clips you had noted. Are there these examples of what you're talking about?
Probably the first one I put up there with character development.
Okay, so this is a review of Midsommar. I don't even know if that's how it's spelled, if this is a joke or something. But what brought you to want to talk about this one?
I think he talks about this in a few videos, but I think this was just a good example of where he talks about, it's sort of a visually very beautiful movie, But the whole plot is just sort of a mess, and along the way there's very little character development. And so he sort of brings that up when he's talking about it towards the end here.
I mean, this in itself amuses me. The worst movie I've seen all year.
So this was something I almost watched this movie, which is why I watched the review. Because now I'm glad I didn't watch the movie, because I probably would have been really annoyed. But
that's like me and the Acolyte, the Acolyte series. Like, I'm very glad I didn't spend my time. All right, so anything else we need to know before I kick off this segment here?
It's a movie about a sort of death cult in Scandinavia.
All right, then here we go.
Very charming.
Character motivations are non-existent. Nobody's really trying to achieve anything in this film. Most horror movies at least give their characters a goal of some kind, like staying alive until they're rescued, or finding a way to defeat the entity that's killing them. And how they choose to approach that goal gives us an insight into their varying personalities. Like the selfish guy who sells out his friends to save his own ass, or the timid coward who rises to the occasion and redeems himself, or the wannabe badass who finally meets his match. Giving your characters something to do, or an enemy to grapple with, allows you to expose who they really are beneath the facade. But Midsummer's characters have absolutely nothing. They walk around, they look at stuff, they talk to people, and then they die, and that's it. An interesting main character.
All right, that's funny. Which is
so that's why it's a terrible movie. Don't watch it. But yeah. it is sort of a fascinating. Again, I mean, clearly he's an expert in what he does. Like, he knows what he's talking about. But also just an interesting analysis of, like, this is what's wrong with this movie. Like, you might watch that movie and come away with an unsatisfied feeling, but not really understand what went wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's where he, I think, is really good at breaking down. Like, look, these characters just show up and they walk around and they die. There's no story arc here. You know, they weren't given any goal to achieve. They weren't even, you know, like bad guys that they were supposed to kill. They just sort of exist and then they go away.
I think this is what you're describing is part of the reason I haven't really felt like I wanted to watch Game of Thrones. Is that when I've heard about or read about characters, it's like, I don't know. I just
where was the point? What was did they have a redemption arc? Did you know what happened? And
they walk around and they die. That it's really interesting. This, to your point about he understands kind of the art he's criticizing, where he's talking about stereotypes, and that for a piece of narrative art like a movie or a book, and he's an author himself prior to becoming a YouTuber. This is not really something I've thought about before, but the idea that you assign a kind of very immediate, transparent archetype to your character, so that people can just grasp it and say, okay, I know what I'm dealing with. And from there, you can actually build nuance and surprise people with who your character actually is.
Yeah. So, like, if you're writing a Western, you have your sheriff character, you have your hero character, you have your bad guy in black character, you have, you know, maybe a damsel in distress character. Yeah, you have these sort of defined archetypes. Yeah, and exactly like you're saying, from there you can play on that. Maybe you can subvert the expectations, and the bad guy turns out to be a good guy in the end or something. But you do need to have some sort of at least shell of a character and a character arc to begin with, because otherwise, you know, playing on it, you know, making a nuance or subverting it isn't going to work if you don't have that initial, you know, character to play with.
Yeah, so this is also something I wanted to talk about, which ties a few different things together, particularly with The Critical Drinker, the fact that most of his reviews involve, well, in the same way Daniel Boland sort of focuses on the British Royals and other stuff kind of adjacent to that, a lot of The Critical Drinker's stuff is around superheroes. Mm-hmm. And I have a sort of general theory of superheroes and why why the superhero genre has been popular for the last 50 or 60 years in the United States, really in the post-World War II era, is the idea that so yesterday I was listening to a podcast with Stephen Fry, the great British comedian. And in the podcast, he was mostly talking about today's culture wars and going back to the critical drinker's idea of archetypes, where when you're writing a story, you assign an archetype. When I'm talking to somebody on the street here in the year of our Lord 2024, I don't assign them an archetype. In fact, I would sort of consciously try not to assign them an archetype. I don't want to stereotype them.
Yeah.
I want to take them as they are and sort of take what's there and not sort of expect, oh yeah, you're this kind of person, you're going to work, you're going to act this kind of way. So what Stephen Fry said is his last 3, I think, books, he said, have been set in ancient Greece, or even in like pre-ancient Greece, and like the gods, ancient Greek mythology. And he said the reason is you can't write a book set in the modern day without addressing the very present here and now questions, which are relevant to us right now. And he said, Stephen Fry said, as soon as it's written, it's already outdated. But if you set something in ancient Greek mythology and you have, a demigod doing something, you're immediately able to kind of address really interesting and deep character and moral and story type questions. And I think Stephen Fry is also getting at this idea of archetypes, and that we see a very similar thing with Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings, where he's writing in a mythological setting. And how intentional or not that is, I think he's doing the same thing. And I think this is very much the topic of Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, which is really addressing the whole modern kind of modernist, postmodernist idea that the important stuff is the here and now, and the important stuff is like the concrete day-to-day interactions that you could read about in a newspaper story. And Tolkien on fairy stories is saying very much, no, you kind of need to be able to separate yourself. And everybody needs to be able to separate themselves and put them in a larger story that takes them above to both a higher and deeper level. And I feel like we're seeing this in a variety of places, or I'm seeing this in Stephen Fry setting his stuff in ancient Greece, Tolkien inventing this mythological world, which is sort of a mythology for England, and superheroes, I really think, are the mythology for America. This is the world we put ourselves in, or at least American guys.
Yeah.
And really since the 1970s, this would apply to the United Kingdom as well, where effectively American superhero culture.
Yeah, they're watching all the American media. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I think maybe, I don't know, there seems to have been a rise in fantasy in general in the last, I don't know, several decades. Maybe kicked off a little bit by Harry Potter, but I mean, to your point, I think it is a little bit easier in some ways to write those books or make those movies when they are sort of in their own world, when they're unconnected from the current events. You can set aside all of the busyness of what's happening right now because you've created your own insulated world, and then you can address whatever it is that you want to address without all that other stuff getting in the way.
Right. And another thing, something I remember our father saying years and years ago about the value of sci-fi, which sort of falls in the same category of setting something in a mythological setting or somewhere where you can just assign like a very classical archetype, is you can put people in a sci-fi setting and actually investigate really interesting moral and personal and human problems that just aren't a thing in the real world. So you can actually like get a new insight in or a view from a different angle into what a human person is, or how dealing with certain types of problems are when you invent this sort of separate world. And as you were talking there, the Chronicles of Narnia came to mind, and the fact that C.S. Lewis, who I think is much less subtle, and I think he admitted this himself, he's much less subtle than Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the Chronicles of Narnia, he explicitly starts in the real world and then takes his characters into a mythological world, like the same people, which may be an advantage there. And you were pointing to this is if you could write the mythological characters into the real world, like in a contemporary real world setting, that would be harder to do, but there might be a real value in that as well.
There's a series of movies about that where what are they called? Where fairy tale characters wind up in New York.
Well, the Marvel movies do that to some extent.
That's true. They do to an extent.
But the whole superhero genre in general sort of does that. What is your second clip about?
So that's a little bit of a shift change, but particularly in his more recent videos, he talks a lot about the message coming out of Hollywood and how basically how all the films or film directors have kind of aligned to have all of their movies with this sort of lockstep quasi-political message about society and the world at large. And it quite annoys him a lot of the time because they sort of they have this agenda that they want to promote, and they shove it into movies where it really doesn't belong, and it sort of takes you out of the experience of watching the movie when you realize that there's an agenda that is being shoved at you. So yeah, I don't know. This is just a clip where he's talking about I think actually in here that the absence of any message.
All right, so I will start this off.
When I think about it, there's a refreshing lack of the message in all aspects of this movie, making it feel like more of a throwback to the 90s original than it has any right to be. The director even went on record as saying that he didn't want to use the film as a platform for some clumsy lecture about climate change, because in his mind, films are supposed to be about entertainment. Holy shit, man, give this guy a raise and put him in charge of Marvel and Star Wars, because we need more creatives like him in Hollywood.
I'm going to have to see this movie now. I didn't watch this one.
Yeah, it's, if you like tornadoes. But yeah, no, he talks about, various times where they just sort of, and I'm sure you've seen this, where, they'll drop in like an LGBTQ character simply because they're sort of ticking a box and they want one of these characters in their movies. It is absolutely nothing to do with the plot, and sometimes will even sort of detract from other characters because they've sort of shoehorned someone in where they don't belong.
So I think exactly what you're talking about and the Critical Drinker is talking about is what has made who is it who plays Deadpool?
Ryan Reynolds.
Ryan Reynolds, yeah, his movie's so good, and also Tom Cruise is. Both of these guys got to make movies of their own because they were already big time stars, not because they kind of met some criteria and worked their way up from the bottom of the industry. Mm-hmm. So I think the success of both of their movie making style, in part, has been, I think neither of them feel beholden to kind of having to uphold some kind of culturally important narrative that has to kind of be behind the entire story. In fact, in the most recent Deadpool movie, I think I saw that there was originally supposed to be a scene with She-Hulk, or whatever the female version of Hulk is. Yeah, and after the scene was shot, Reynolds just said, "No, we're not putting that in." Which takes some guts, but if you've already made some incredibly popular movies, then
She-Hulk is such a shame because I forget the name, Tatiana something. I forget the name of the actress. She's a really, really good actress, and they wasted her on She-Hulk.
That's kind of a shame. A couple last things I wanted to bring up are something you touched on already is enjoying listening to someone talk about having the same experience in participating in a work of art that you did, but
Mm-hmm.
being able to speak to it on a more insightful and deeper level. Um, I'm going to tie this back to something I tie other things back to periodically, which is one of the big points of psychotherapy in modern psychology is to be able to talk people through their own experiences and help them to see that this is normal and that they share the kind of reaction they have to this experience is a normal human reaction to have, and that a lot of the value there is in being able to walk through one's own experiences and see that yes, this is normal, this is okay. And I think that's part of what for his audience the critical drinker is doing for them, to whatever degree that's
Yeah.
sort of consciously the case. I wanted to ask you, who do you think is the audience?
I don't know. I mean, I guess in large part he's pitching it at just your average everyday uh, moviegoer. Um, I mean, there's certainly, when he gets into some of the things about the combating the message that comes out of Hollywood, there certainly can be kind of a right wing tilt to it, but it's not really like he's sort of pandering to a certain political crowd, because his problem with like the message is not that there's an issue with the message itself. It's that when it's put in a storyline, it's very obviously just sort of shoved in there with no respect to the overall story or the characters. Like I'm sure if there were a movie that had the message integrated correctly, he would probably have no problem with it, because his issue is with the storyline in general. So
So what I'm hearing is good art is right wing.
just inherently,
Yeah.
it just happens. No, well, that's the thing. It isn't necessarily right wing. You could have a perfectly good left wing movie. I don't know any, but theoretically, I think you could have one.
I get mixed up on some of the names of these older movies, but was it Fahrenheit 458 or something? There was this Michael Moore movie he made about climate change,
Mm-hmm.
about basically tornadoes and super cold, basically destroying human civilization, and it's mostly set in New York City. I really enjoyed that movie because the climate change thing was sort of what made stuff happen. But at its core, the movie made me think about, wow, what really is most important
Mm-hmm.
in the human experience? Like at the end of the day, put everything else aside. Like what is truly important is what that movie made me think. So yeah, I was being facetious with the good art is right wing. I think your point is good art is in a way deeper than politics.
Yeah. Well, and I think good art is coherent, right? There is a sort of cohesive whole to it. It's not disjointed. It's not just sort of everything is thrown at a piece of paper. You can look at it and understand the whole picture, and maybe that makes it right wing, but so yeah, I don't know. I think he's pitching it at just average normal people who are watching movies. Maybe because there are a lot of Marvel reviews, maybe it's slightly pitched at younger males. But I don't know, and maybe some of his persona might appeal to younger males as well. With with the whole drinking sort of machismo Scottish thing going on. But I don't think he's overtly doing that. I think that may just be sort of a by the way this is also happening kind of thing.
I agree, and I think the popularity of some sort of boomer generation, so kind of the oldest popular YouTubers, are not boomer millennials, people in my demographic.
He's a millennial.
He is. He
Okay.
was born in '83. I think that makes him a millennial. A lot of the popularity of right-wing millennials in mainstream internet culture, I think, is connected to the fact that things have gotten to a point where millennial men are not predominantly right-wing, but Zoomer guys, I don't know if I'll call them men yet, are much more right-wing. So it's the younger guys listening to those more conservative voices that do exist sort of above them. I've been kind of shocked myself with my younger coworkers, guys who are 15 years younger than me, at kind of how unabashedly just heterodox they're willing to be about most topics. So the last question I would have is, off the top of our heads, can we come up with a better content type for the critical drinker, or just another content type? Is there another aspect of art or culture that we think he could speak to well?
I mean, I would love to see him do more book reviews, because he, like I said, he did a few initial.
It was at this moment that the recording software crashed. Sad face. All right, so to wrap things up on better format or content type for the critical drinker, you brought up book reviews. That is interesting, especially since he's written himself. And I think one of the problems there would be you can't make money, I suspect, doing a lot of book reviews. You brought up potentially criticizing fine art, which, I think could be very funny. And then he does do these roundtables with multiple other guests, but he doesn't really delve into the podcast format, which is this longer form, more one-on-one or small group conversations. So I wonder how well he would function in those. I haven't been especially captivated by the long form podcasts that he's been a guest on. So I wonder what that's
like. Do you see him doing a podcast about movies, just basically what he's doing now but longer?
I think the way the critical drinker views art is he has a very quick reaction, and he's able to express that in a few words. And that in part is what makes his content compelling. Is he'll burn through a 2-hour movie in 8 minutes and kind of encapsulate the whole thing. Whereas you go to somebody I've been watching a little bit more of recently, Theo Vaughn, where this guy, you can give him a very small amount of content and he'll just go down a rabbit trail and start telling you stories about all kinds of stuff, which I think fits more in the podcast spectrum. I listened to one podcast that, what's his name again? Will Jordan, the critical drinker, that Will was on, and a lot of his answers were fairly short, where he basically would get a question about, what do you think about this topic or cultural thing? And the answer was, fairly straightforward. Like, so this is what I think.
Straight to the point, not going to fluff around. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So do you have anything else before we jump into Wikipedia Roulette?
No, this is good though. I definitely liked him. I'll probably watch more of these. So it's a good find.
Excellent. All right. Here we go. So the rules: we have to find a random Wikipedia page that we can talk about for a couple minutes, and we give ourselves up to 2 rerolls. So first go, let's see what we get. Clipper Tours, an Australian coach operator in Sydney, was. Do we want to try to talk about Clipper Tours, or shall we re-roll?
Reroll. Let's see what else.
I think I agree.
Okay, let's
This
go back.
couldn't possibly be controversial, or I definitely think I could talk about this to some extent. But do you want to try this, or we go for our final roll?
Yeah, go for the final roll. I have a
All
feeling
right.
this will happen every week. We'll just keep seeing if it's going to get better.
No,
and
it'll
it
get
won't.
better. Oh dear. I think this
We're
is going to
stuck.
be a complication. So the page we rolled is I don't even know how to pronounce this, and there's no helpful in pronouncing it, but Anchan. I want to say Anchan or something.
Anchovies.
Anchali Viva Tanachai, born 1952, is a Thai writer living in the United States, a recipient of the SEA Wright Award.
Studied gemology. It's weird. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I know nothing about this person, but she studied gemology, which is like a cool.
So this does have a connection to what we were talking about today in terms of this is a writer. So it's an artist from Thailand.
No matter how tenuous, we will find.
We'll find a connection. This is pretty tough. So we'll read the entire Wikipedia article here because it's very short. Do you want to give the bio a go?
So I have to pronounce these things. She was born in Thornbury and received a BA in Thai language and literature from Chulalongkorn University. After graduating, she went to live in New York City with her parents. She met her husband there. She studied gemology at the Gemological Institute of America and worked for a jewelry company in New York City. Anchin Ankan. How do we decide we're pronouncing this? Anyway, published her first story, Mother Dear, which in 1985 was named the best short story of the year by the Thai Pen Center. Her short story collection, Jewels of Life, received the Southeast Asian Wright Award in 1990. A collection of poems called The Letters was shortlisted for the Southeast Asian Wright Award in 1995. I wonder if I assume she's writing these in Thai, not in English, but maybe they're also translated in English.
Yeah, that's a good question. Given that she received a BA in the Thai language, but her parents were living in New York, I suspect she's extremely good at both Thai and English, so maybe she's publishing in both languages. Do you know anything about the Thai language?
No.
So Thai is one of these languages that fascinates me because there are a lot of similarities in script types. So you see the ancient script types like in Egyptian, or you see it in some Native American languages where it's what's the word for letters or words that look like the thing they are? There's a word for it, but
like hieroglyphics.
Yeah, pictograms, I think is what I'm looking for. A lot of these ancient languages have this pictogrammic style, but then when you see languages move into styles that have letters or syllables or at least meaningful parts of words, effectively letters, they seem to fall into families. So you have the whole sort of Western European language family, where we use the same letters, basically. There are a few differences between languages. You have an Esset in German, which they're trying to get rid of because they hate their own culture. Or you have the bar L in Polish, which makes the W sound. So there's some differences. And then you move further east, and you have, for example, Greek and Cyrillic look very similar. But I can read Greek, and Cyrillic means absolutely nothing to me. But again, it seems like these letter types, and Cyrillic even is named after, I believe, the early Christian church father, Cyril.
Yeah.
He was the apostle to the Slavs. So I don't know why he wouldn't have just used Greek letters for them, but I'm pretty sure Cyrillic is kind of derived out of Greek. But then I feel like you go to the East, and in East Asia, maybe this is just me simplifying things a lot. Obviously, Chinese and Japanese script is different, but they look to me like related language types. When it comes to Thai, it's this very loopy script.
It has all the little circles on it.
Yeah, Thai language is what I need. And I'm very kind of curious about the origin or what language family this script comes in. So Thai language of the Kra Dai family. So you can see here an example of the name of the language in its own script. This just looks very unique and different to
Yeah.
me. The Indian subcontinent, I think the languages there typically have a similar type of script. So here we go, Kra Dai languages. Although it doesn't have its own spelling. This is just pronunciation. But yeah, the spelling of Thai letters to me is a fascinating thing. So that's me attempting to make something of this. But if I ever meet Anjali Vivatanachai, I'm sure she would know more, having a BA in the Thai language.
Yes. I mean, really, what I know about Thai things is mostly informed by The King and I. So
Were there any Thai actors in The King and I?
no, well, because back then it was Siam, and
Yep.
I think even like all the extras, like all the women in the harem, I suspect were some other sort of Asian, whatever, maybe
Japanese
Chinese would have been
yeah.
what was in Hollywood at the time. Yeah.
Seems likely to me. Do you know much about gemology? That's maybe the last thing we could make an attempt at.
No, I just thought it's sort of very random. Like she has a BA in Thai language and literature, and she's a writer. That totally makes sense. Then she goes to New York and just studies gemology. It's just sort of very random.
I guess it kind of reminds me of an employer I had a couple jobs ago who was a professional psychologist and also taught psychology. But then she had previously been a professional model.
Yeah.
Again,
it's cool because you don't see that, I feel like, as much anymore of people. She's like a Renaissance woman. She writes and she studies gems and makes jewelry. It's very diverse subjects, and I feel like you don't come across that so much nowadays. I think it's more frequent to see people just staying in one area, and maybe when they retire they might get into something else. But
right. Good stuff. Well, I think this is it for episode 2. We'll see how well we can edit the parts together, and I will talk to you before too long.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jake.